of the folks that we have on the panel today. We have some of the best trailblazers across the country when it comes to some of the most important topics that we are facing as communities today. And so having the chance to come here and have a conversation is, for me, personally really exciting. And I think it is those topics that we're seeking to address today. Community land ownership is, for me, the means to an end. It's a means to an end of how we address inequality in our society. It's how we create community and social cohesion. It's how we tackle things like climate change, and ultimately how we improve health and well-being outcomes for everybody that lives in our country and within our communities. So, without further ado, I'd like to sort of get that underway so that we can start to listen to some of these fantastic, inspirational folks that we've got here in the room today. And I would like to start off by passing the baton to my colleague, Dr. Katie Doyle, who is another one of those fantastic, inspirational people, to tell you a little bit about the report that Community Land Scotland has just published around this.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Just a few housekeeping points while we get going here. Please turn off your videos and mute yourselves. This is our first event of this scale that we've done on Teams, so do bear with us while we work through a few points. We also intend to have a question session at the end of the event, but as we only have an hour, it's unlikely we're going to get through all the questions. But please do put your question into the chat and we'll discuss as many as possible. And if we can't get to your question, we'll come back by email with an answer to all of the chat questions later. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome everyone to the event on behalf of Community Land Scotland. If you don't know, Community Land Scotland is a members-led organisation which acts as the voice of community owners throughout Scotland. We were set up over 10 years ago and continue to be led by the people involved in community buyouts throughout Scotland, like the Isle of Eigg and Harris and Mull, but also Wenlock Head and Dumfries in the south and Glasgow. We know that community ownership of land and buildings can be transformative because it's done that for many of our communities and many of our members. The key is that communities need to be in charge and that ownership should be done on their own terms. Reflecting on our history, we focus on community buyouts of privately owned land and buildings. An absentee landlord is an absentee landlord, regardless of whether it's a wealthy individual that owns a Highland estate or an overseas pension fund that owns a commercial building in a city centre. Regardless of who owns it, owners have land rights and responsibilities in Scotland, and communities have right to buy land and buildings. Land is owned and used in ways, should be owned and used in ways that's fair, responsible, and productive. And these are the things we mean when we talk about land reform. But we're here to celebrate the successes of urban land reform and urban community ownership. Land reform is not just a rural story, as the title of the report that we're launching. Building on a long history of Scottish community ownership, some really great achievements. There have been some really great achievements since important land reform rights were rolled out across Scotland 5 years ago. And we're launching a report celebrating those, which you'll have hopefully seen. The report is filled with excellent examples of the successes of urban communities, demonstrating the possibilities of community ownership in towns and cities. There are really great successes, and we're going to hear about some of those today, but there's also a lot of challenges, and there's work that's needed to reap the full benefits of urban land reform. We see this very much as a celebratory event, but also looking forward to what's next. As part of addressing the challenges, Community Land Scotland is launching a community ownership hub targeting Glasgow, which is focused on helping urban communities with their buyouts. So I'm going to turn over to the panel now, we have great speakers talking about the perspective of those who have bought out land or buildings, but also those who are working on these issues. And I will go back to Martin Avila, who is one of our board members at Community Land Scotland and the director of Kinning Park Complex in Glasgow.
Okay, better now. Zoom's got a feature when your jokes are a bit rubbish, it automatically mutes you. So that's probably what's happened if mute kicks in. As Katie said, I'm here with two hats on today, which is quite good because I've got two outfits too. I've got a shirt on and a pair of joggies underneath. And so I think that's reflective of the two hats. I want to introduce our panel today, and I want to give more time for them with their stories rather than my dodgy patter. So I'm going to give them the chance to introduce themselves to you, and to tell you a little bit about their story and their involvement and their views on community ownerships before we'll go around with some questions, and we'll try as much as possible to make this as close as possible to the kind of chats that we used to have in places that weren't our living rooms and bedrooms and spare rooms through a Zoom screen or a Teams screen. So I'm going to start off, first of all, with Neil Rich, who is from the National Lottery Community Fund in Scotland. Neil was involved in setting up the Scottish Land Fund quite a few years ago, and has now, been part of that journey all the way through to the day. So, Neil, could you tell us a little bit about your involvement with the Land Fund and with community ownership in general? Neil's part is also ropey, so he might be subject to the Zoom algorithm or the mute algorithm as well.
You're absolutely right, Martin, but I want to congratulate you on wearing at least long trousers. Well done. My name's Neil Rich. I'm the Scotland Director for the National Lottery Community Fund. It's really lovely to see the folk I can see on the screen. And as Martin says, I cut my teeth in community ownership actually in youth and community work in Shetland, and then thought I'd better see what all this urban business was about and moved to the Scottish mainland. And I joined the then New Opportunities Fund to help set up the first Scottish Land Fund back in another century, actually, in 1999. We launched in 2000 and have worked on funding programmes in the community ownership field since then. So when the first lottery fund at Scottish Land Fund was succeeded by something called Growing Community Assets in 2006, and that then morphed into something called Community Assets. You can see what we're doing with the name there. In 2016, and so between all of those programmes, I think I've been involved in somewhere north of £150 million worth of investment in community ownership in Scotland. And actually, when I think back to how we started, that is absolutely extraordinary. And the way that world has changed around availability of support, legislative frameworks that support change, the development of skills among organisations that support change, but also the sheer amount, and I think everybody in any institution should remember that in this kind of field, we stand on the shoulders of folk who actually do the work day to day, who are willing to put their hands up in communities and say, hey, we could own that, we could run that. That's often a brave thing to do. So I think everything I've learned about community ownership, I've learned from folk actually doing it. And some of those lessons are fairly universal, and we'll probably talk about them a bit more, but they're about folk listening properly to each other, talking to each other, using the skills that they have. And the thing that community ownership reveals often is the sheer capacity we have in our communities in Scotland, and it's been a really humbling business to be able to help with
that. Fantastic, thanks very much, Neil. I'd like to introduce now Bernadette. Bernadette is with Burmulloch Community Development Company, who have owned assets for quite some time, and so I'll let Bernadette tell you around that.
Thank you very much, Martin. Afternoon to everyone. Absolutely delighted to be here with you this afternoon. And first of all, I think I should probably say happy anniversary to all at Community Land Scotland, since today is a milestone event for the organisation. So BCDC, Burmulloch Community Development's affectionately shortened title. We were absolutely delighted to be one of the first community organisations to receive an Urban Award from what was Neil referred to Scottish Land Fund in his talk there, and now CLS. And we've actually been helped and supported by them on 2 occasions in terms of bringing ownership of assets directly into our community. Interestingly, now we're actually being sponsored by Community Ownership Support Services, COSS, and Scottish Government to provide a free assistance package to other local community organisations who are looking to acquire property or land. And again, I think that touches on something important that Neil mentioned, which is whilst you've got a desire to do things, often there's a lack of experience or just sort of some missing jigsaw parts in terms of how you connect everything up. So we feel that we've been around the block a few times. We've made many a mistake, but instead of being floored by that, we've tried to take the learning from all the things that we've tackled over the years, and we feel we've developed some expertise over the years, and now we feel we've got sufficient ability to help others to steer them clear of some of the pitfalls that we just, fell right down, and some of those obstacles that can sometimes deflate communities and derail that ambition. So we've tried to spare some of our fellow community organisations the same fate that we had. One of the main reasons I was so pleased to be invited along today was really to seize the opportunity to share what's at the heart of the support that we've had as an organisation from CLS. And so whilst it's nice for us to kind of look back a wee bit today, and that's important and that's really enjoyable, for us that just signals a bit of a timeline, a starting point where we can chart to measure what we've done since it all sort of started to kick off for us in Burmulloch, which was back in 2016, with that support for our very first ambitious venture. And that's what we're trying to do. The reason we want to do that is so that we can measure what impact it's having on our community, because that's a really hard thing to do. It's a really important thing to strive to find out, because unless we can sort of have tangible outcomes of what we've done, how do we justify, how do we know we've been a success or even part of a success? So that's the sort of big challenge for us. With the Scottish Land Fund connection, that took us down an avenue that's now paying dividends for us, I have to say. So for example, we have another contract to deliver a pilot scheme, and we're already dealing with 4 other community organisations, helping them towards their community asset transfers as part of our own enabling strategy. We see that it's only right that as a sort of seasoned community organisation, we should be up and ready to assist others and enable them too. I want to sort of nail my colours to the mast this afternoon as well, and say that hopefully we're not finished with Community Land Scotland ourselves. We're planning a huge new development ourselves. It's in the early stages, but we would definitely hope to continue to work with Community Land Scotland in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bernadette. Jennifer from Action 40, could you say hello?
Hello. Hello, everybody. I'm Jennifer Elliott. I'm the Treasurer of Action 40, who run Belfield, which was a former church in Portobello in Edinburgh. And back in September 2016, we were the first organisation to use the community right to buy legislation in an urban context. So we had Scottish Land Fund and Architectural Heritage money to buy the church building and take it into community ownership. So while I'm treasurer now, I wasn't at the start. I come into this really as a layperson in Portobello, not involved in land rights or land reform in any significant way, but I had been involved. I'd been the treasurer and the chair of the local after school club, who had been told that they were getting kicked out of school, shortage of space. We had desperately gone around Portobello trying to find somewhere that could accommodate 70 kids, and they were all used. There are spaces, but they were all used, and eventually they did get into Belfield. But I really woke up to the importance of community space at that point, and I really did not want to be the chairperson that closed down a 30-year-old after school club because we had no venue. So it got sorted out, we got back into the school, but at the same time the Belfield project was bubbling away, and I went to one of the meetings there, really got inspired by the group of people who seemed to know what they were doing, who had good plans for the building, and crucially there seemed to be a pathway that they could follow to do something. It didn't feel hopeless. So I told the after school club I was giving them a year's notice on resigning and joined the Action 40 board. And in the time there, Community Right to Buy involved a lot of getting signatures. It's quite a process, but you go around your neighbours, your streets, you get signatures to support it. And I really enjoyed that bit. That really got me hooked. And then I got involved in the building and the running of it and have been there since. And when the original treasurer resigned and I had been treasurer before, I kind of phoned the chair up and said, okay, I'll do it. I'll do it as long as I don't do fundraising. And that has been the case since. So I'm not a fundraiser on this organisation, but have done the treasurer bit. And Belfield is an old church with a lovely building built in 1809 for the former church side, but quite impractical to work with for ourselves. We need to try and change that part. And the bit that I knew, because I wasn't a churchgoer, was the community halls, the large hall and the small hall. And they were the spaces my kids had been to drama in, my kids had been to brownies, they'd been to parties, we'd hired it. I wanted to make sure that was kept and did not become flats. And the sea is at the bottom of the street we're on. They would have made beautiful luxury flats. They would have made very expensive luxury flats. They would have been great for the people that bought them, but they would have no longer been community space. And that's why I got involved in that piece. So we've since developed the space. We've ran it as a viable business. In the year prior to lockdown, we had run with no grant funding. We had initially had 18 months of Scottish Land Fund money to cover salaries, but within the last year we had no significant grant funding, and we were running a small profit monthly. So we were a viable, if marginal, business. Lockdown has changed that. We've kind of mothballed everything at the moment, but it was so hopeful and so encouraging, and I've got to work with a lovely board that meet regularly and work so hard and make things happen, and it's really energising. And when the building is live and full and people are doing what they want in it, it feels great. We have these ideas of hosts. You go along and lock at midnight for a wedding, you open up at 3 o'clock for a party. It's really a lovely way to be involved in your community, and something I value lots. So that's my perspective, I would say.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm going to pass you over now to one of the hip young things of community land ownership. I think Fatima might be from Scotland's newest community landowner, having taken ownership of the Bath just 2 days ago. So, Fatima, can you give us the hip young things perspective on all this?
I think we need to unmute you, Fatima.
Do I do that? Sorry. Thank you, Martin, for calling me a hip young thing. God, 54 years old. That's pretty cool. I think I can outdo you with those long trousers. I've got a mug of wine at work. Joking. So thank you so much for inviting me here. And I had no idea, to my shame, that it was your anniversary. So congratulations. But it's also an anniversary of ours, 20 years to the day yesterday when we occupied Govanhill Baths. 2001. For those of you who don't know, it's the longest continuous occupation of a public building in British history, with guards and police for the entire time. And we're very, very proud of that. And we celebrated that within COVID restrictions yesterday, which was a very, very moving experience. So, yes, we are the hip young things, I suppose. And in many ways, I think we're probably as urban as it gets. In Scotland. For those of you who don't know Govanhill, where we're located, it is one of the most congested communities in the whole of Western Europe. Lots of people packed into a very, very small, tight knit community. And it is also one of the most diverse communities in the UK, certainly outside of London, with 88 languages spoken. Movements of migration have made their home here. And the latest, of course, is the Roma, who we've welcomed, and the largest Roma population in the UK resides very, very close to Govanhill Baths. So, yes, we have now embarked on a it keeps growing, doesn't it, by the day, £9.4 million project, and the work is starting imminently tomorrow. There'll be men and women in hard hats getting ready to refurbish our beloved baths. So we fought for 141 days to save the Govan Hill Baths from closure from Glasgow City Council in 2001. And from then till now, we've just not been fighting to save the baths, but we've also been doing a massive amount of work within the community because our aspirations for the building have never changed. And the things we couldn't do in the building because they were shut, we did outside in the community. And our slogan has always been for the community, by the community, and that's what's really driven our work. So a combination of community activism, arts, creativity, and grassroots change has really been what has driven us all this way. We now have 27 staff, run 8 distinctive programs outside of the baths, 4 of which are social enterprises, 3 of which fund themselves pre-COVID. We need a bit of support during COVID, as do so many other organisations. But the wellbeing program was right there in the beginning, and we do a wide range of activities to promote positive health outcomes for local people. And at least 10% of the population has taken part in Govan Hill, at least one of our activities. So 1,500 people. So we're absolutely delighted that they've taken part in one course or another. We also operate things like Govan Hill Youth Club, Rags to Riches, which is an upcycling environmental project that's doing incredibly well. We've always had a very, very distinctive arts, very, very strong arts project, and now we run Govan Hill International Arts Festival every year, and it's now in its 5th year and growing as an antidote to the level of racism that was emerging in response to our very vibrant community. We also now have an arts centre, so we also have like a portfolio, if you want to use that yuppie language, but we also have a number of buildings that we don't own, but we rent, but we'd like to own, and where we derive income from. And finally, we also have something which we thought was very, very important from day one, is our own archives and heritage project, because we believe that our journey and the journey of working class people that struggle to bring about social change should be recorded and should be promoted and celebrated. Virtually everyone that works for Govan Hill Baths, certainly the entire board, 3 boards, we've got 3 boards, live within a mile. That's one of the rules and regulations of Govan Hill Baths. The majority of our staff and volunteers, and obviously our participants, also come from the local area. We also, don't know if it's still the case, we were the biggest community shares campaign in an urban area in Scotland. We raised £260,000 because the funders told us we had to raise money to contribute to the capital build. And I've got a few problems with community shares, but I won't bore you with that at the moment. So lovely to be here. Tried to shove our 20 years of activity into 5 minutes. I hope I did that. So happy to answer any questions. I might put my details in the chat, and then if any of you want support or help with information after this, more than happy to have a chat to you. Thanks, Martin.
Yeah, no worries, Fatima. Just proving that you should listen to the youth, and also, you know, when Fatima offers you solidarity, she really means it. So, you know, if anybody needs help, I'd say take up that offer. I see. Oh no, an accidental hand up by Brady maybe. Now I would like to sort of zoom out a little bit from, you know, the kind of on the ground perspective and pass over to Miriam from the Commonwealth, who can you want to say hello, Miriam?
Hiya, can you hear me okay? Great, excellent. It's so lovely to be here, and I'm so inspired by all of the stories of everyone's journeys. As Martin said, I come at this from a bit of a policy perspective. I work as Director of Research and Advocacy at Commonwealth. We're a London-based think tank working on ownership strategies for a democratic and sustainable economy. And I think this discussion is so important for many reasons, but one is just that when we speak about land reform, the images that are often conjured up are of rural Scotland, or of grouse moors, or of the landed gentry, deer stalking. And while urban land reform is still in its relative infancy, it boasts an incredible potential to insulate communities from economic crises and tackle inequalities, whether that's socioeconomic or climate related. And Scotland has made strong headway in recent years with regards to land reform through the Land Reform Acts, Community Empowerment Act, but land reform should never be seen as a one-off. Instead, we need to view this as an ongoing process. And I think transitioning our focus, well, not transitioning, sort of including in our focus of land reform, urban land reform, opens the door to so many possibilities. It's about churches, it's about post offices, it's housing, it's community hubs, it's green spaces. And it's about how these places are used and how they're managed, and it's about the involvement of communities in decision making to serve their needs. And so I'll just briefly speak around some of the policy proposals that we've set out to ensure that land reform and urban land reform in this context can flourish, with a set of policies for the future, either directly or indirectly promoting urban community ownership. So the first is introducing an upper limit on the total amount of land in Scotland that can be held by a private landowner or single beneficiary beneficial interest. The second is strengthening community right to buy powers to enable communities to acquire land at below market value. The third is granting local authorities the legal power to issue compulsory sale orders to bring land which has been vacant or derelict for a period of time into public use by selling it via public auction. This can be accompanied by the establishment of a new democratically accountable Scottish Land Development Agency with the power to purchase, develop and sell land and ensure that this key resource is being managed strategically and crucially in the public interest. One of the other proposals we set out was a Common Good Act to go beyond the local authority focus offered by the community empowerment legislation and provide formal mechanisms for the residents of boroughs, for example, to exercise direct democratic control over common good assets. And I think all of this can be complemented with a new era of community wealth building. The pillars of community wealth building are a plural ownership of the economy, making financial power work for local places, fair employment and just labour, progressive procurement of goods and services, and socially just use of land. And I think that can provide a really nice context and be a basis of new local economic transformation to create the kinds of democratic, inclusive and community-based economies that we need to see, economies that are centred on collective well-being, local resilience and ecological sustainability and economic justice. So I'll leave it there for now because I've probably chatted for too long already.
No, not at all, Miriam. I'm probably going to come back to you just now. What I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to go through and ask some questions of people on the panel and give the chance to people on the panel to ask questions as well. But just like we want to share ownership of Scotland's assets with as many people as possible, we also want to share the asset of asking questions with as many people as possible as well. So if there are questions that anybody in the audience would like to direct in general to the panel or anybody specifically, please do put it in the chat and we'll definitely try and get to some of those questions at some point. I may as well start back with you as well, Miriam, if not for any other reason than challenging the assertion that you were speaking for too long. I think we need you speaking more in public debate in Scotland. I'm sure everybody will agree. I think, you know, that as the idea of sort of community ownership has been advanced, you know, some people are worried that community ownership of assets is going to mean a weakening of the public sector, or that it's going to be simply, you know, the state retreating and leaving everything to private interests as well. I think there's a wider conversation that we had about, you know, how we fund public services properly in the country and what the role is for, you know, a bare minimum that we never want to go below, you know, and even to set aspirations a little bit higher than that. But I was just wondering if you, in your own opinion, could speak a little bit about what do you see the benefits of this pluralistic ownership being in terms of also having community land trusts or, you know, community owners within that mix?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. And yeah, it's something we've thought about a lot recently. And I think some of the ways in which community ownership has been misunderstood is that it's there as a replacement for the state. And I think we need to be really clear in saying that we need strong public services, be that healthcare, be that be that social security systems that support people, that that help to alleviate poverty, that help to, and we need tax systems that redistribute wealth and power throughout society, and community ownership should not be something to simply replace some of the services that we know have, some of these services have been through a decade of austerity. We know that they've been hollowed out. And what we can't see is just that just as a response to it. I think there is an element of economic resilience to community ownership, that it does tackle a lot of those inequalities, and that's to be encouraged. But we need to see it as something that accompanies strong public services. That's something that accompanies huge levels of investment, like just now in particular with COVID and our recovery. What we should be seeing is the largest fiscal stimulus possible at the minute, to really learn our lessons from 2008 in the aftermath of the last financial crisis, and create a massive jobs programme and investment in every single constituency throughout the UK. That's what we need to be seeing at the moment. And it's programmes like that actually, with the state of our public services in the aftermath of austerity, but also the way in which this crisis has really exposed a lot of the inequalities and injustices that actually existed prior to the crisis as well. For example, the inadequacy of sick pay. And actually what we need to see is a real kind of post-World War II moment of a real reevaluation of our social security system, of levels of public investment, and where that public investment is going and who benefits. So no, community ownership should be a strong accompaniment to that, to those strong public services. And I think that's why approaches like community wealth building are so important, because they recognise and acknowledge that as well, that there is an element of resilience there. If we look to the likes of the Preston model, for example, and the achievements that they saw after their community wealth building, in the process of their community wealth building strategy, we can see that it does start to build resilience. And that is hugely important, but we can't see that as something to replace strong public services.
Here. Well done, Miriam. Thanks very much. Bernadette, I was going to ask you if it's okay. You talked a little bit about why, but I was also going to ask you the question of what. So could you tell us a little bit about the assets that BCDC own and the services that you provide directly to your community? Because you've done a great job of explaining the support for others, but tell us a little bit about what BCDC means to the good folks of Burmulloch.
Yeah. So BCDC means a tremendous amount to our community. We currently have 3 community-owned assets. Our sort of showcase piece is the Quarrywood Hall. We call it our Burmulloch Residence Centre, and it's built on the ground that a former it was like an old Nissan hut. That was the kind of community facility that was there. And we remind ourselves regularly, we don't know whether we should be proud of what we achieved or hang our head in shame about the length of time it took us to get there. However, we got there. So the good news story is that we got there. And that facility, I mean, bricks and mortar, that sort of tangible asset plonked right in the centre of a very densely populated part of the city of Glasgow as well, built with such flair and quality, for local people. And it was clear to us right from the get-go that the language we used when we were discussing what BCDC is there to do, who it's there to serve, all had to be about, this is your company, these are your assets. So we've always kind of stuck to that clear narrative about these are community owned. So anything that happens in them is directed by the community, for the community, and it's not about, whilst you've got a sort of a working body, the board and the officers who are there to sort of staff it on the day-to-day, the operational part of it, it has to be owned by local people. They have to feel and understand and feel welcomed and part of it. So whilst we wanted to provide that structure, we wanted to be very clear and very careful that it was always understood that it was in community ownership. That then allowed us to, establish ourselves and to expand and to grow, because the new facility really we're challenging ourselves back. Well, what are we going to do with it? Because we want to, the issues in our community, they'll be common amongst lots of other communities. So poverty, unemployment, low car ownership as well. So sort of accessibility to other parts of the city. Glasgow's got fantastic facilities in other parts of the city, but if you can't get there, if you can't get your family, you know, you don't have money to travel there and that type of thing. So we wanted to draw people in and provide that locally for people in Barmulloch too. And we also, the two other community assets that we own, one is a former church building, and the Church of Scotland allowed us to rent it from them, a peppercorn rent, for about £1 a year for many, many years. And it was again with the help of yourselves that we were able to purchase that and bring that into community ownership. Now that's based in another part of Barmulloch, which sits cheek by jowl with one of our other fantastic natural assets, which is Rob Royston Park. So we sort of refer to that as the kind of lungs of Barmulloch. That's the wide open space that's there. So we focus that asset now, that will focus around all our recreational activities. We have a kind of a low ranking in the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation figures, especially around poor health and well-being. So we wanted to start to try and address that in a tangible way. And that leads me on to the last of our 3 assets that we took over, which was another church building in Barmulloch. It was a former parish that was deconsecrated, and the owners were the Archdiocese of Glasgow, and it was their intention to go straight to demolition. But we managed to persuade them because, like other communities, whilst we had some community facility, we had not sufficient to provide what was needed. So we appealed to them to say, would they consider allowing us to use it for community purposes? And in that way, you know, we'd said to them, you were removing yourself as a place of worship from the community, but the community still needs support in other ways. And to their credit, they allowed us to submit a business plan to show what we would do and how we would manage that and how we would fund that. And then again, we were able to purchase that. That space allows us to provide a boxing gym, which is so well established now, so well used, not only by our community, but actually attracts lots of other more kind of elite athletes. They'll come and they'll train there. It's a bit out off the beaten track as well. So that's actually good for that sort of flow of other visitors in and out of our community. And we wanted that community to appeal to others too. So that's what we've done with our 3 assets at the moment, but we've got many more plans.
Fantastic. That's a brilliant story of creativity and also ambition. Thanks very much, Bernadette. I mean, Bernadette's told us a little bit about where you can go, you know, when you get started on this journey. But I just sort of, you know, looking back to one of the questions that Carol's put in the chat, I'll ask you, Neil, because you'll have seen it happen many times. Carol's asked, when starting out in a project, what are the best strategies to ensure what's created is actually what the community needs? So can you tell us a little bit about maybe what you've seen, which has been effective in engaging the communities that the SLF and predecessors have served?
Glad to. I could bang on about it for hours. I think there's something really important that Jennifer said early on and that Bernadette spoke about as well, which is in the end, you just have to talk to folk and you have to find ways and spaces that allow different people to express themselves. It's a constant challenge. I think it's really easy, and it sometimes feels like enough if you're involved in a community group to say, we're open, we're here, we're listening, but you have to demonstrate it. So if you're all, you know, middle-aged white men like me, you need to think about what that says to the group of people you're trying to engage with. If you think that having a 3-hour meeting is a good way to engage with your young people, you have to think about that. You have to be creative. You have to use all kinds of exercises that allow people to think about the space they're in and think differently sometimes about that space. You also just have to do some of that really boring stuff. You need to sort your governance out. You need to get it right. You need to be open. You need to be willing as well to explain things more than once. You need to be willing to talk to people who say, but, because, you know, there's a lot, you know, the Scottish concept of the black abbots, and people just go, but. So you need to have those conversations as well. Also make use of the support that's around, because in Scotland we have a fantastic and rich landscape of support. So talk to the Community Ownership Support Service. Phone us up, talk to the guys at the Scottish Land Fund. They are fantastic. Our colleagues at High are fantastic at supporting people through that early process. Learn from folk like Barmulloch Community Development Company and spend time talking to them. Talk to DTAS, talk to whoever is useful for you. Different communities will find different support mechanisms more or less useful at different times, and make use of the resources that are available. So there's funding available to help you do some of the technical stuff. You won't always be successful, but you know what they say, shy burns getting out. So ask, and also don't be afraid to sell what you're doing, because in terms of what Miriam was talking about, that there's a real confluence between what public bodies are trying to do often and what community owners can do, whether that's about space for youth work, space for nurseries, green energy, better green space, safer streets. So there's a whole bunch of people who want you to succeed, even though it'll feel bureaucratic and it'll feel like hard work and it'll be midnight on Thursday and you really don't want to do any more of this stuff. There are folk who want you to succeed. So I would say that the biggest step to take is to be super open. Be open and clear about what you want to do, why you want to do it, and be welcoming of other people and other people's voices in that conversation.
Fantastic, Neil. Thanks very much. It's quite a good segue into where I was hoping to go next. I'm going to ask you a wee question, Fatima. It is 2021, and the events of the last year focused our minds on many things, but they also focused our minds on bringing an end to systemic racism and discrimination. And so I want to ask you, as living in and working in one of the UK's most diverse neighbourhoods, what role can community assets and community asset ownership play in tackling discriminatory practice and helping tackle systemic racism?
You're muted, Fatima.
Yeah, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I hope I wasn't swearing there. Well, you can't call yourself a community organisation if you're not anti-racist. And if that is not on your website or you've got to be openly inclusive. And that's not just about being fluffy and tolerant, but it's actually about saying we are against homophobia, we are anti-racist, we want a community that is inclusive for all and listens to all. And so the activities you run have also got to be inclusive to all. Racism, and you find this in so many communities, not just communities like ours, but, when people are shat on and feel awful because they've got lives destroyed by austerity and welfare reform, and they feel so powerless that the only way to actually exercise a degree of power is to find someone who's worse off than them so they can give them a kicking. And that's what racism is, isn't it? It's not just about racism, but, people do look for the weakest in the community to batter as a way of feeling somehow, in control of their lives. And of course, as communities here, I would expect that if you are fighting for a community asset, that you want to do something better than what existed before. And that means actually improving everyone's lives. So I do urge people to be really open. And I think it comes from being an activist background as well, that being open about the sort of society you want. We don't live in a little microcosm, or maybe you do. Maybe you do want just a little bit of sanctuary amongst all the madness. But we should also be talking about the bigger picture. What happens to you in Balmulloch or in Milton or wherever is also happening to us in Govan Hill, maybe in different degrees or in different manifestations. But that's why things like this are really important, that we have a sense of unity and sort of like holding hands. And I urge anyone who wants to come to Govan Hill to see our project, come along. We've very often invited people and, done exchange trips and so on. It's not just about us saving the swimming baths. That's what it started. It wasn't just about that particular need for the community to save this beautiful heritage building because we deserve it. But it was also about the aspirations that once people thought, actually, why don't we also look for that and get that? And we've never had that. Why can't we have that? And people start feeling a sense of power. But that means nothing if everyone is not benefiting from it. So, and I know it's hard. You know, people go on and on about, do you have a diverse board? How much of the percentage is BME and all of that? And it can be a bit patronising, and it's really difficult to get any board members, let alone BME ones or young ones or, you know, LGBT ones. Most important thing is that your organisation is open, it's inclusive, it has a zero tolerance of any form of bigotry, and that means it's welcoming for all. It means that you have a set of ideals. That means that it doesn't matter who you are, mental health people will come and they'll be part of it and feel like it's theirs and they have ownership of it. Anyway, I'm going on a tirade, I think, here. Martin, I think I'm about to do that. Anyway, yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more with everything you said. Thanks very much. I want to ask yourself, Jennifer, you know, what's changed for you? You talked about coming at this from an individual point of view, right? That you came along as an individual member of your community who, you know, didn't necessarily think about themselves as wanting to get involved in community asset ownership. Yet here you are on the podium talking about it. What's changed for you as an individual since, you know, all those heady days of the parent kit or the after school club?
Lots and nothing. So what changed? What I've seen as a good bunch of people remained a good bunch of people. Some folk have come and gone, but they worked well together. They had a real energy and an ability to get things done. And I do think that's something that community ownership builds. You have to create an organisation. It's not individual members of the community. There can be an idea in democracy that each individual can vote in an election and make a difference to the government or the council. But you know what, that comes around once every few years and it's hard to get everyone together. But a group of people working together for the same ideals that you've kind of agreed yourself is powerful. So I think one thing that's changed in Belfield that we all cared about really from the beginning is the environmental aspect. So we've managed to get solar panels on the roof of the large hall. We've managed to insulate the attic. We've got money from cycling, let me get the right fund, I think Cycling Scotland, to build e-cargo bike storage spaces where they will be rented to the community. They'll be running off a battery, which is getting installed end of this month. So we've got funding and a loan for a battery to take the energy from the solar power panels, store it, charge the e-cargo bikes, rent the e-cargo bikes, or have them used within the community, reduce car usage for those trips round about. So right at the beginning, we had the themes of accessibility, environmental and heritage were around the Belfield building. And I think the one that's changed and been driven forward and had one particular board member's really driven that forward. That's been an important theme. But one of the pieces we struggle with is sometimes the coherence of planning. And whether it's urban or rural, the planning laws can be difficult. We just got the news last week that we're not allowed to go ahead with the sheds, the e-cargo sheds as planned because it's a graveyard and the council architect has just said no developments to anything, even though we were going to do a sonic test, a geosonic test, I don't even know what that is, but we would have known if there were bodies or layers under the piece we wanted to go to, and we didn't want to go deeper than 50 centimetres. Right now, we've hit a complete no on any developments in the building, which is ridiculous and will be a campaign that we're going to have to follow through. So we've hit a blocker there. I'm sure it'll work through, and we've had many successes. The solar panels do generate. I have a little app on my phone that tells me how many trees it's the equivalent of. I should have looked before this. I can't remember what number we're at, but that daily energy is produced and will be stored from the sun. What else has changed? I suppose Action Porty's grown up a little bit. I do think we're actually the babies in this group, only being about 3-4 years old. When the others have talked, they've been going 20 years. The Govan Bath story, there's a very long history. Action Porty set itself up with articles to be a development trust, but really the last 4 years have only been running the building of Belfield. And that's been plenty. Blimey, that's kept us all active, all practically doing a second job on top of our day jobs on the board. But we've now reached a point where we want to pull the development trust apart and have Belfield run as a community asset, but the ambitions are beginning to grow. So possibly another thing that's changed in Portobello is we had a town hall, we had a council community centre, and we had Belfield. The town hall closed 18 months ago. It was run by the council. We closed it very suddenly, kicked everybody out with about 2 weeks' notice, and it was just mothballed. They called in some community groups and asked us what we would do, but then they put it up for a lease, and that was February 2020. So a group has formed, and I'm the one person that goes from Action Porty in this new one called Portobello Central. And I guess at the start I was a parent that liked using the space. When I got involved in the Portobello Central organisation, I was a person who'd been through the community buyout, and while this is a council building, so it's asset transfer, I'd been through that loop. I spoke with confidence and interest and belief that we could take the building back into community control. So they're separate, Action Porty and Porty Central at the moment, but they're talking together, they're collaborating. It's driven Action Porty to behave as a development trust and to evolve. And we put the proposal into the council on Friday the 19th at midday, and we'll hear on the 20th of May whether our proposal's been successful. So as the Action Porty chair quite often says, more community space you have, more community you get. And I've kind of gone from not knowing much about this to my friends on Facebook would say I'm a bit of a community space bore these days. Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks, Jennifer. Sounds like we have to put a warning out there. Everybody, community ownership is a gateway drugs, folks. You may well end up like Jennifer, that you started just dabbling in it, and all of a sudden that's you running around the country dealing community ownership to others. So, you know, I fully support that radicalisation process. The more of it, the better. Nikki has put a question in the chat to yourself, Miriam, around can you share some inspiring examples of I think moving from private, because one of the things that we talked about is that this shouldn't just be about bringing the public assets into community ownership. We also want to start to talk about bringing private assets into a community ownership as well. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit to that, either some examples or some of the barriers that we need to get around to have more of that.
Yeah, so one of the examples that I was reading about actually just in this report, and I also read an overview of it with by Catherine Trebeck, who runs the Wellbeing Economy Alliance Scotland, and was in Linwood, and to declare a bit of an interest here that my mum's family are from Linwood, but it's a town that underwent massive and widespread deindustrialisation, and the scars of that are really still felt today. And the stories from the Linwood Development Trusts and the scale of asset transfer, I think, can provide us with hope, but also blueprint for how we can scale these types of projects and allow them to flourish in other places as well. And it's not an urban setting, but I took a group of people up to Scotland, feels like forever ago now, pre-pandemic times. And we visited the Isle of Ulva, and that was incredible to see the developments there as well, because you had an island that had faced, you know, elements of market failure, and actually what you've got now is the prospect of huge levels of repopulation and a future again for that island community, and so I think, you know, for me that kind of bridges some of those divides, if you like, because I think sometimes rural and urban land reform are spoken about as kind of two separate things, and often, and I'm sure I'm guilty of this as well, urban land reform is not given the same prevalence as rural land reform, and I think that's maybe a testament to Scotland's kind of concentrated rural land ownership, and in so much as how extreme that concentration actually was and remains. But there are similarities between both rural and urban land reform, both in terms of the drivers. So if we think about kind of elements of market failures, but also what people are trying to seek, you know, it's about who's in the room, who's making decisions, whose interests are those decisions in. And so there's a common thread that runs between urban and rural land reform, and I think that's I think that the examples that we're seeing here today, and indeed from the fellow panelists, are hopefully just the start of a massive scaling up of exactly this.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Miriam. I did promise the chance for panellists to ask questions, but Katie is digitally waving at me at the moment, which I think is time to say that, you know, it's time to round up and go to the pub. So we will be meeting in the pub, I think September 7th, if anybody wants to join. But, you know, we all might have went and had a coffee or something stronger to talk about, you know, new ideas. I'm afraid the panel's going to have to pass that responsibility on to everybody today, to go back and speak to others in your organisation, in your community, in your household, about what community land ownership can mean for you and for the communities that you're part of. What we have seen today is that community ownership is about all of us and the challenges that all of us face. It's about ending wealth extraction from communities that leave us much poorer, often less able to deal with the challenges that we face. It's about providing ways in which we can tackle climate change. It's about creating new jobs. It's about creating new art. It's about ripping down barriers to solidarity. It's about ending discrimination. So there is quite a lot to be getting on with, folks. You know, so if you know you could make your way to the door in a timely fashion and go home and revolutionise your communities, that would be very much appreciated. But what I will do just now is pass you over to Katie, who will tell you what's next for Community Land Scotland and where we're going with that. But before we do that, I'd like everybody just to give a little digital round of applause to the fantastic people on the panel today, because it has been a great event and it wouldn't have been that without all of you. So thank you very much.
Hi everyone. I won't keep you very long. I just wanted to echo Martin's thanks and his call to arms as well, and to say that we're going to continue these conversations. In April, we have an event lined up, the third Urban Community Ownership Land Gathering, which is going to come on your screen in a second due to my excellent administrative support team. So we know this is only an hour and there's so much to talk about here. So we wanted to put out a save the date, so you can follow Community Land Scotland on social media and come and continue these conversations. There'll be a lot more about the Community Ownership Hub in Glasgow and Clyde, which is the project that I'm setting up there. So thank you everyone for your time, and we'll let you get out of here 2 minutes early. How about that for timekeeping?
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Kerry. Thanks to Emma and Kerry in the background, to Christina for helping set this up. Thanks again to everybody in the panel, and hope to see you all sometime soon in a less socially distanced environment.
Thank you, Martin.
Cheers, folks. Thanks.